In this chapter of movies, we're going to look at how to work with tables in Contribute. Tables, of course, are great for presenting data in tabular form, meaning you can use them to display data in nice, neat rows and columns. And that's what tables were originally conceived for, but it didn't take long for designers to realize that you could also place images as well as text into table cells and manipulate the behavior of tables in such a way that you could lay out entire pages with them. These days, however, laying out your entire page in tables is considered kind of a dated approach to designing pages. And most designers these days favor the use of cascading style sheets to control the layout of their pages. But because you can't create your own cascading style sheets and Contribute, you may still want to use tables as a layout device, or at least lay out some sections of your pages with tables. But you'll probably want to check with your site administrator first, because they can prevent Contribute users from adding tables to pages if they want to, which makes sense if they have designed pages to be laid out primarily with cascading style sheets. But of course, you may be interested in using tables just for presenting data, so if you find that you can't add tables to your site, be sure to ask your site administrator to enable them for you. So in this movie, I'm going to show you how to create a new table, and then we'll see how to edit and format the table in the upcoming movies. I've got a blank page that I pre-created here, and to create a table, all you do is place your cursor wherever you want the table to appear, and you can either come up here and click the Table button, or choose the Insert menu and choose Table. And here in the Insert Table dialog box, you can set up the initial properties of the table you're selecting, but keep in mind that nothing you do here is set in stone. You can always come back and make changes. So if you have a general idea of how many rows and columns you're going to need, you can add them here, but you can always add and delete rows and columns later. For this example, I'm going to go with the default 3 rows and 3 columns. Under the Options section of the table, you have the Table Width area, which lets you determine how wide the table is going to be. If you leave Default Width selected, Contribute will create a table with columns that are 100 pixels wide. If you want a different table width, you want to click Specific Width, and then enter a number in the text box here. You can choose between pixel and percentage-based widths. Pixel widths allow you to set a width that will always stay the same width, no matter what size the visitor's browser window happens to be. That is, unless you put something in the table that's wider than the width you set. For example, if you put an image that's 400 pixels wide into a 600 pixel wide table, the table will expand to accommodate the image. But as long as you don't put anything wider than the table into the table will always stay the same width when you choose pixels. A percentage-based table, on the other hand, allows you to set the width of the table based on the width of the browser window it's displayed in. So if you set a table to, say, 75% width, the table will grow and shrink depending on the width of the browser window it's displayed in. Percentage-based tables are useful when you want to do something like cover the entire width of the page. In that case, you would set a width to 100%, and the table will always expand to the full width of the browser window. For this example, I'm going to go with the default 300 pixel width. Now notice here that there are no specifications for setting the height of a table. Table heights are determined by the table's contents, so the table won't get any taller than it needs to be to contain its contents. Next, we see options for border thickness, cell padding, cell spacing, and header, and we'll get to those in a little bit. But for now, let's click on OK and see what our table looks like so far. So there's the table we just created. Now, just to make sure you're clear on the terminology associated with tables, tables consist of rows and columns. Rows run horizontally, and columns run vertically. The area where rows and columns intersect is called a cell. So in this example, we have a table with 9 cells. Each cell can contain text, images, movies, and even other tables. When you put a table inside of another table, it's called nesting tables. To add content to a cell, you just simply click inside that cell. You'll get your flashing cursor, and you can just start typing some text. Now you'll notice that this column is now expanded now that I entered some information. The default behavior of tables is to collapse the columns that don't have any content. And we'll talk about controlling that a little bit later. But for now, if I delete that text out of there and then click outside the table, you can see the table goes back to its default empty appearance. Now let's look at how we can go back and change some of the table properties we were looking at. First, you just want to select the table, and you can just click on the border of the table, and you know it's selected when you see these 3 handles here. And then you can choose Format Table Properties, or you can right-click on the table and bring up Table Properties. Now, this dialog box looks a little different than the initial one we used to set this table up, but it contains the same settings here under the Table tab, as well as a few additional properties. We'll talk about the row and column properties or the cell properties a little bit later. For now, let's look at some of the other properties we can set for the table. We've got border thickness, and the best way to demonstrate this is to change it a few times. The default border thickness is 1 pixel. If I change this to 0 and hit apply, you notice that the border disappears and is replaced by these dotted lines. These dotted lines are only visible in Contribute and are just there so you can see the table cells yourself. If you were to look at this in a browser, the table would be invisible and you would only see the contents of the table there. If I set a border thickness of, say, 5, you can see that the border around the table gets a little bit thicker. If I go a little bit more extreme to, say, 15 and apply that, we get this huge beveled edge that you'll find in cutting-edge web designs if you take a time machine back to, say, 1997. Typically these days, table borders are usually, say, 1 pixel for a very thin border or 0 pixels for an invisible border. It's borderless tables that let you do things like lay out your entire page without making it look like everything is placed inside boxy table cells. Next, we have cell padding and cell spacing. And to show you what these settings do, I'm going to go back to my other table example. So let me just click OK and go back to this other table where we actually have some content. And I'll just come in here and bring up table properties. Okay, so the first thing we have here is cell padding, which you can see is the pixels between the border and the content. If you look, you can see how the content of the cells is butted up right against the edge of the cell itself, and that's the case for all of these cells. If I want to add a little bit more padding in there, like say 5 pixels, I'll click Apply, and you can see that the cells look like they've expanded, and that's because I've said that I want a little bit more padding around the contents and the cell walls. We also have cell spacing, which is the space between the cells. So if I increase that to, say, a size of 10 and hit Apply, you can see that the border between the cells has gotten much thicker. So that's the difference between cell padding and cell spacing. Padding is inside the cell. You can think of a padded cell they might throw you into. And cell spacing is the space between the cells. Now we also have the opportunity to select a border color and a background color in here. So you can just click the color well, and you can click on a border color. You can see what that does. Actually, if I increase the border thickness to, say, 5, you can see that actually applies that color to that thicker border. And you can choose a background color for the entire table, like so, and apply that. Not the greatest color combination, but you get the idea. I'm just going to switch those back to the default colors, which is no color. Click OK. So that's a little bit on how to create a table and to play with some of their properties. In the next movie, we'll look at how to select specific areas of a table.